Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Vizard. And today on the gang, we're talking about sustainability. It matters. And then we're going to explore whether or not data centers will be looking at that nuclear option. And then finally, it looks like the governments around the world have figured out that cybercrime is indeed a global problem. You're watching Techstrong. All right, let's start out with introductions for our gang members today. We have, of course, joining us once again from his perch in Denver, Mitch Ashley. Mitch, how you doing?
Happy day. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
All right. And then, of course, we have Chris Blask, our resident cybersecurity expert, is joining us once again from what appears to be an undisclosed location on his boat.
It's not that undisclosed, somewhere near Daytona, but good to see you folks.
All right, awesome. And of course, we have Bonnie Schneider because, we wouldn't be talking about climate change without Bonnie, that's for sure. Bonnie, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Awesome. Mitch, let's start with you. This is a survey that Techstrong Research did when we were asking folks about their plans for DevOps. And we had a question in there about whether or not they were actually pursuing sustainability initiatives. And I got to say, I was surprised by the answer. It was a much higher percentage than I thought. So what's your take on what's going on here?
Yeah, this is part of our broader DevOps Next research that we were doing. And one of the things we wanted to find out is there any sustainability activities that are either tied to DevOps or other initiatives within the organization? How prevalent is it? You hear about it, but people are talking about it, but are they actually doing it? And it was 54% of the respondents said that they had a sustainability initiative tied to IT operations, et cetera. And we kind of broke it up between, cloud migrations, platform engineering, cloud infrastructure, software efficiency, things like that. And it ranged between, kind of 28% the low end to ops at the high end of 54%. And I don't know that the numbers are necessarily as significant, the details of the numbers, as much as it is that so many folks, over half the respondents, did have and were aware of a sustainability initiative tied to IT technology, infrastructure, technology investment, including software. So, we're talking about it. It sounds like organizations, are doing something about it. At least they're paying attention to it, and the folks in their organizations know about it.
Bonnie, I know you track this closely. It's been a long time coming. So do you believe the numbers? And B, where do you think we go from here?
Well, I've been talking about this for a while, so I am so pleased when I read Mitch's report. And he graciously asked me to give a quote, which is in the report as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see, because I can remember a year ago talking about it and it wasn't as top of mind as it is now. But ServiceNow mentioned, of course, in the report and talked about it a lot. That was a company at the Sustainable IT Awards I was just at a few weeks ago in Austin, had a prominent place there. And just by the enthusiasm I saw at that event I think they said that it doubled in attendance from the year prior, and that includes major corporations as well as the DevOps community being represented there. It's not surprising, but it's encouraging to see that it's coming to the forefront, because addressing sustainability in the IT community is key to reacting to climate change and mitigating the impacts of it and reducing our energy use while still optimizing production and minimizing costs as well. It's all possible within that framework.
Chris, I know you kind of track this subject because, you're living on a boat. So this matters to you.
Solar powered boats, right? And that are data platforms soaking up data from the ocean to help those issues. But the important word, I think, in Bonnie, in your statement, is costs, right? Everybody wants, as you hack these sort of problems, how do we get to the sustainable, clean, green future that we'd like for all our grandchildren and so forth? And hey, maybe even ourselves. You have to look at all the motivations. Like, everybody really wants that. We can argue about, details and so forth. We want clean air and happy dolphins. And as you get corporations aligning whether it's having happier employees, better employee retention, lowering your costs, looking forward, over the next several years, next decade, the energy consumption of the tools we're using, AI and so forth. This is lining up from a lot of supporting directions. So I have a lot of hope for this, even if we don't have hope with us today.
She'll be here someday.
Mitch, what is your sense of how much of this is like driven from the top down and it's some board level initiative tied to, carbon counting and all those other things versus maybe I feel like to me, some of this is more driven now by the rank and file who particularly care about an issue. And it might be a DevOps team or it might be a vice president level somewhere who's just decided that this is going to matter to us and kind of is driving the initiative.
Well, I certainly think there are those instances where employees care about, something like sustainability, and that's been growing over time. And it could be I'll say a rogue or whatever the right term is, leader who has decided to take this on. But I do think you're right. It's generally a corporate policy. And one of the reasons is because more and more we see these kind of things appearing in contracts with suppliers, with vendors, companies that we work with. What is your sustainability initiative? Do you track whatever the language might be? And so I'm guessing that it's one of those to say we're going to do it. It's another one to say you have to report on it, either to, a regulatory body or in a contractual sense. So I'm guessing it's as much contracts as anything.
Bonnie, of course, the political climate is changing these days. So do you think that this interest in sustainability has achieved enough momentum that regardless of what happens in the political front, it'll just keep going?
I actually do. I've thought a lot about this. I think that within the corporate structure that I've seen in all the different organizations I've had a chance to personally interact with, it does seem independent of that because the consensus within those communities is to be more sustainable as, as we're discussing, of course, cost is an issue, but with the international picture happening and the global ESG mandates that are coming forward, some of it is going to be not by choice, but a lot of it, from what I can tell, is by choice, regardless of any exterior political influence.
All right. We just need to hide those windmills from time to time when the president comes around, right?
Got to watch out for that.
Mitch, how much of this is also, it almost feels like it's a gimme in some regards, right? If we care now more about cost and we're tracking workload usage and we're trying to be more efficient, we're trying to write better code, then sustainability winds up being a byproduct of all that. So honestly, how hard is it to be conscious of sustainability when there's all these other things I'm supposed to be doing for my job that lead to it anyway?
Well, I think there's an indirect or maybe even a direct relationship to FinOps, right? As you're trying to be more efficient in use of your resources from a cost standpoint, generally speaking, that's probably also going to help with your sustainability efforts. Not always one-to-one, but certainly if you're going to be more efficient in how you write code, be more efficient in what resources you spin up. So it's not just writing code, it's also all those virtual machines, services, things that you leave on that you don't have to. And arguably you could say things like cloud native with microservices and Kubernetes containers are one of the ways that you can also make resources more dynamic. You don't have to spin up great big large systems or large numbers of instances. Maybe you want to have some level in reserve that are on kind of active standby ready to kick in, and then Kubernetes can kick in more across clusters and locations where those are leverageable. That's kind of down in the bits and bytes. But that's the architecture that we're running in these kind of contemporary software environments. Again, I think cost will drive it. It always comes down to money, or I've got to do it for some other reason, right? And even if I believe in it passionately, I can do that for myself personally, but organizations tend to operate on those two factors.
Well, I don't want to.
Go ahead.
I don't want to preempt the C block, but again, these are the same sort of things. So you look forward, and you see topics like transparency, and in this one, supply. The carbon impact of producing a product or a service, for example. In the past, it is impossible to say exactly what that is. It's more and more possible today, right? So as an organization, you can choose to do that or not, and there may be a competitive advantage in actually doing that. And it's the same thing in security and supply chains. And you see Department of Energy and Department of Homeland Security and all sorts of big staid, structures moving towards transparency. So as you look at sustainability, again, as everybody's been saying, you can say you want to be a corporate entity and not know, how much energy you're using or what impact it has and, how your customers react to that. And maybe that works, but I don't think for much longer.
Yeah, I was just going to add that beyond the software side of it, as we've been reporting here on the Techstrong gang, a big issue that's been growing in interest and also just in use is that end-to-end life cycle of how are we going to recycle, reuse, and repurpose our equipment. And that's something that IT departments are embracing because it's an issue that they have to face all the time. And I've just seen a bigger movement in that, in kind of looking at this as a whole scope of IT sustainability within the product lifecycle, within the software, within the coding, and preparing for regulatory requirements that are coming in 2025.
Bonnie, do you think we still need to promote this within organizations and give people merit badges for their efforts? Or are we getting to the point now where it's part of our conscience and we're thinking about it as part of our regular day job?
I think from what I've seen with the Sustainable IT organization and their awards that they just had in Austin, it's very important to encourage it because the employees of the companies like to see that. They like to see that their IT department is working on these initiatives. And it's just for the percentage of people that are unaware of the connections that we've been speaking of so far today, it creates a better awareness. And that's key, driving awareness, driving education and unity within organizations. So the IT teams are working hand in hand with other teams. The Chief Sustainability Officer of Dell that I had the privilege of sitting down with in a fireside chat recently said that things have changed just in the past 18 months, where she's working much more hand in hand with the finance department than they ever were before. So we're seeing that gelling within the corporate structure. So I would say yes, that should continue.
Mitch, are you going to look at this again and see where we are next year? I mean, if you kind of put this all together, we like to see a trend line, but what's your bet for next year? More? Same?
Well,
Less?
two bets I'm going to make. Yes, we absolutely want to look at this again. And, you would think the trend line's probably up, but we'll see. The other is I'm going to consult experts like Bonnie and see what other things we might be kind of tying into this. We don't have a full survey about sustainability. Maybe that's something we would do with Bonnie down the road. But there's probably a few other things I'd like to tease out of some kind of key questions we want to know. So Bonnie, I don't know if you need your thinking cap. You can probably just say it right off the top of your head, but I'll be reaching out to you soon.
Great. No, I really enjoyed the report. And for anyone that hasn't had the opportunity to read it and download it, it's Mitch, you can say where it's available, but I downloaded it and read it. And I really thought it was comprehensive and well done.
Thank you very much. Techstrongresearch.com. You can find it in the resource section.
Right. And of course, Bonnie, you're doing that Echo Insights coverage for us too. So point people to that.
Oh, right. Ecotechinsights.com. I guess that's always in my head always. So yes, and that's where I've been putting a lot of the videos that you see as well that we've been showing on Techstrong Gang in full. Like some of the interviews are in full length on that site as well as Techstrong's TV as well.
All right. Speaking of video interviews, we're going to have one in a minute, folks. But hey, sustainability appears to be top of mind. Now challenge is keeping it there. We'll be back in a minute.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
Saving energy when it comes to AI, well, there's a new way of looking at it, and some of the big tech giants are already jumping in with new deals emerging. What am I talking about? Well, it's nuclear energy, specifically small modular nuclear reactors. I took a closer look at this technology and the companies that are embracing it. Hi everyone, I'm Bonnie Schneider with your EcoTech Analyst Insights. Nuclear power for data centers? It's not just possible. Tech giants are investing billions in the idea. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are exploring small modular reactors, or SMRs, to potentially power their growing AI operations. These compact nuclear facilities can generate between 80 to 300 megawatts per unit, enough to power data centers and cut carbon emissions. Microsoft has already entered into a major nuclear power agreement. Google and Amazon secured groundbreaking deals to use SMRs. The first installations are expected to be operational within the next decade. Timing is critical. Data centers now consume 4% of U.S. electricity generation and could reach 9% by 2030, with AI operations pushing these demands even higher. Small modular reactors offer a unique solution. They can be built in just 5 to 10 years and have advanced safety systems. Before you envision nuclear reactors popping up next to every server farm, there are some hurdles to overcome, namely public perception. Nuclear energy often raises concerns about safety due to past incidents, and gaining public support, especially near urban centers, remains a daunting task. Education and transparent communication will be pivotal in shifting public opinion to see nuclear energy as a safe option. SMRs could reduce costs, influencing where tech companies build their infrastructure. Swift and supportive policies could accelerate adoption. Nuclear-powered data centers aren't just an innovation. They're a potential blueprint for the future of sustainable tech infrastructure. The U.S. Department of Energy is advancing this transition with $900 million in funding, underscoring the strategic role to meet the rising demand for clean, reliable, and affordable power. As I mentioned in the piece, one of the obstacles that I think gradually is already being addressed effectively is a changing public perception in terms of fear of anything with the word nuclear in it. I think that as time goes on, that is going to be achieved, especially as we're looking for more sources of clean energy that can be implemented to back this AI demand that is incredible and growing. I'd be curious to see what the panel thinks.
I think a lot of folks are like, well, what 20 things did we blow by before we got to nuclear? Is it just that we don't have enough power for all these big AI things, or are there other things to think about before we get to the nuclear option? I don't know. Chris, you got
The
any thoughts?
nuclear option, yeah.
I love nuclear, right? So I've been privileged to spend a lot of time working in the electric sector. It's one of my favorite sort of areas in all the infrastructures we deal with, and particularly in nuclear, right? Yeah, at the end of the day, like I say, I use solar power myself all over the place. Big fan of green energy and stuff, but having that solid base load and fusion is what we have right now. Maybe in our elder years or our children or grandchildren will have fission and so forth. But I agree with Bonnie. I have a lot of hope in this next generation of micro nukes that can be done safely. Everything has a risk and a downside, but I am not particularly concerned with the risks of this generation of nuclear energy, and I'm hoping it can get some traction.
Well, it seems like we're also talking about not massive nuclear plants, but also micronuclear, right? So, we've been doing self-contained nuclear and space probes and things like that, and obviously they're subject to different conditions. They don't have tsunamis and hurricanes and things like that. So as long as we're parking them right, off the deck of Chris's boat next to the ocean, I suppose we're all right. We don't want that hurricane hitting. Not that you attract hurricanes or anything, Chris, but I think that's one of the dilemmas. Is like, okay, let's be really smart about where we put this. There's tornadoes here, there's earthquake here, there are increasing weather patterns, things like that. And I think if we're smart about how we place it, that will help keep some of the concerns down and hopefully accidents and things happening.
I agree. I just want to also mention that keep in mind that these nuclear options that we're talking about, they're not going to be immediate. It's going to take a little while to build them. I think I mentioned 5 to 10 years, but they will be supplemental to the solar and wind and renewable power that we're using, because unfortunately, as I'm sure Chris knows, solar power is not 100% reliable. It needs the sun in order to work. So we need to have some sort of backup. We need to be able to power AI without hurting the grid as much as we're expecting it to in the next few years. So I think this will be a good supplemental option.
But if we do nothing, we will surely suffer, all of us. But if we do something and it's small and something goes wrong, the damage can be perhaps contained. Is that kind of the trade-off?
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Well, and the grid is a great example for all of these things. We have to understand that the North American electric grid that most of us here care about is this. It hasn't been around a long time, and it was built. I've been privileged in my career to talk to some of the folks that started it. Old folks by my recollection, who were there at the beginning and said, "Yeah, we understood that this star topology, thinking mainframe terms, is not the long term, but we can burn coal right here and pump energy out. It's more than just nuclear and solar and wind. We're building a national and global smart grids that store energy and make energy and use energy in complex ways." And again, I think this generation of small nuke has a really good potential application for a lot of base loads at done properly at near zero environmental impact.
And one thing too, Chris, I imagine the folks kind of designed the grid originally weren't anticipating what we do today with self-generation of energy, right? And storage locally. A lot of things that have come along the way. Talking about hanging a, small nuclear generator off of a network, kind of interesting times.
Well, I find it kind of reassuring that actually they did. And you see these
Oh, okay.
analogies in computing science, same sort of ways. It's like they're just like, this is what we can do right now. But if you're in computing in the 50s or 60s or whatnot, it's not that hard to look ahead and say, at some point, this all meshes together, right? So none of this is particularly new. And this is based on solid engineering. This isn't, crazy, IT tech stuff, right? So there's a very predictable, again, I think, very positive path in the energy space.
Well, I mean, do you think that these smaller reactors will generate enough excess energy to be used for other use cases besides IT? Because you kind of hear IT folks driving a lot of this conversation around a data center, but it would seem to me, especially when I look around, there are tons of other use cases for energy that are consuming as much, if not more, than the IT folks.
I agree. And I think with the evidence that we have of climate change and how it's likely to impact our just power demands because of extreme heat waves, the prolonged heat waves that we've seen as a result of climate change and the frequency of more extreme weather events, that is also putting stress on the grid. So this could be a solution towards just general energy production for homes and for just where it's needed as time goes on. A lot of this is going to be determined in the next 5 or 10 years as these these small reactors are put into play for AI. But absolutely, I do see additional use rather.
Mitch, does IT get a bad rap for consuming too much energy, or is it justified in your point of view?
Well, there are HVAC systems that kind of keep our climate in our inside of our organizations and things like that, electricity that we use. But more and more, especially because of AI popping on the scene and, the AI processors uh, consuming so much more energy, that's gotten a lot of attention by folks. Now, we've always been concerned about power consumption just because of cost. So more efficiency driving into servers, more kind of compute and storage per rack. Now we're talking about, GPUs and neural inferencing units that are so taking up so much power. We put two of them in one rack, and it basically doesn't consume a rack because the bottom third or quarter of a rack, they require so much energy. So I think there's going to be a lot of attention to where did we overbuild, where do we over rotate on creating too much processing power for AI? Do we need it in different places? And do we want to center that all in so much into one or a small set of locations? Because that puts a lot of demand geographically in one area for power consumption. I mean, you can literally, now they're talking with the local PUCs and power organizations about can they build there? Because do they have the capacity that they're going to require for a data center that has a lot of AI GPUs in them?
I feel like though we're in a moment, and if I think about AI, it's we got a bunch of GPUs that weren't really designed for that use case in the first place, and we discovered that they lent themselves to that. But if we go back and we design processors and systems for AI from the ground up, they'll be more energy efficient by definition, and a lot of the initial code is, shall we say, not great green code, but we'll get better at building this code. So I wonder if we're going to actually have this problem to the degree we think we're going to have it, or is it going to be maybe advances in other areas that will mitigate some of the energy consumption issues.
Well, certainly, I think the energy efficiency curve will definitely get better, both in the software, but especially in the hardware. And we do see now chips that are designed specifically for AI, both GPUs, but also neural processing units that are part of a processor, like the Apple A chips that show up in our M1s, excuse me, and the A chips that show up in our iPhone devices, just to pick one example. But NVIDIA and the folks that are either have or coming out with chips, I think, are more conscious of that because they realize that that's a constraint. We've got to be more efficient than how much we can compact into one area and what the power requirements for that are going to be in a rack.
And there's so much room for improvement there. I mean, I have tremendous optimism about the future of energy systems. I think, 100 years from now, we'll look back and go, oh my God, they actually made it work at that level of efficiency. My numbers may be a little bit off, but an internal combustion engine, I think the maximum efficiency you can get in gasoline is like 35%, 65% going to heat. That's by the time you've gotten that gallon of gas out of the ground, refined, blah, blah, blah. And so you look across, energy production, storage, transmission, use, as you're saying, consumption at the chip level and so forth. There's so much room for improvement. You can imagine us using 100 times more energy and, with 1% of the impact at some point in the future. Timing, of course, being everything.
But I also feel like there's a lot of room for improvement to the grid itself because, at least in my understanding of it, what this thing we call the grid is actually a bunch of, I guess, smaller grids connected together. And the grid on the West Coast may not be as robust as it is in the East Coast because of design issues and things that have evolved over the years. But can we get better at power distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's aging. So much of the technology behind the grid is just not comparable for what we're facing now with energy demand, population growth, especially in coastal areas that are hit by hurricanes and things like that. And then you, of course, as I mentioned, have this impact of extreme weather events happening in communities that don't normally see them. We've seen tornado outbreaks in areas of the country that don't typically see tornado outbreaks, and that's all connected to climate change. So yes, I think that the grid overall needs a lot of improvement, particularly where it impacts urban areas that are just aging and not prepared for the infrastructure. And on a similar scope, I'm sure you've all seen the video in New York City when these storms are coming in where the subways are flooding. And it's just, talking about 100-year-old infrastructure being able to handle the modern catastrophes that we're facing now.
It's amazing that it dries out and continues to work, but I
Yeah.
think that's testament to the folks who work on it. Chris, I know you follow a lot of government activity, and I'm sure the government is spending money on all this electrical grid and various other projects, but I sometimes feel like our efforts are disjointed and we have all these different little small efforts. Is there a reason maybe to bring all this together in some sort of unified effort, or is the effort to unify things just going to get in the way?
I'm pretty happy, I think, with governance as a whole. You look at the NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, is the private sector entity that creates the regulations. Its partner in the U.S. federal government is FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or something like that. And then you break it down into Idaho National Labs, the Department of Energy, and the International Society of Automation. Bringing together in the security space and other technical spaces, the folks. And I think we have a good balance of organizational regulation and standards and efforts and so forth. It's hard to see a more efficient system. And to branch off in Venezuela for a second, want to talk about it. As Bonnie was saying, a grid that's not ready for today. Venezuela's a train wreck. They had a black start. They lost everything, bringing it back up. And I don't even know where to go next with them. But I've worked with neighboring countries there, and you can, take the existing infrastructure, build it forward, move it forward with the proper cooperation of public and private. It's just not a monolithic thing. It's hard to have a single answer to. And I can, criticize all the actors too, but I'm generally pretty pleased with the governance aspect of all this in North America at the moment.
All right, folks, we'll see how all this plays out. But in an era where everybody's kind of anxious about the economy and their jobs, I'll tell you one thing. Some of the happiest people on earth are the folks driving around in those HVAC trucks because they got demand for their skills for as far as anybody can see. We'll be back in a minute with our next block.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.
All right, folks, we're back and we're moving on to our next set. And we're talking about cybersecurity on a global basis. We've seen Interpol take down some IP addresses and systems associated with the bad guys. And now governments around the world are pledging to work more closely together. I keep seeing these agreements, though, Chris. Are they meaningful? What's going on here? Because I feel like every other year there's a press release talking about our efforts, but I don't see the actual tangible output. But maybe this Interpol thing is a sign of the time.
Well, for all the Dirk Gently fans out there, everything really is connected, right? And I personally appreciate these sort of eras we go through. There was a threat intelligence era, was that 10, 15 years ago? And that's, that space blurs, that space and time blurs around that 5 or 10 years before and after and whatnot. But we go through this exercise of saying, do we really have to know what's going on? Do we really have to share this information? Do we really need to get the transparency, with all the intellectual property risks or people knowing that we have vulnerabilities or whatever it is? And, for anybody who missed the game show on that one, the answer is yes. Yes, we need to do that. And now with supply chain explicitly being the main issue in cybersecurity writ large, in DHS and CISA, the Department of Energy and so forth, and radical transparency. At the Department of Energy, as I see it right now, radical transparency is the key thing. Secure by design, all these other, as you're saying, all these other initiatives. And you compare that approach to these closed systems. So Russia has its own internet now. Congratulations, have fun with that. China, similar sort of things. The approach that, we will cooperate as needed. Interpol is a good, reputable organization. Our allies have good law enforcement organizations, good, reasonable governance organizations. And we've been building decade to decade, faster, better transparency as appropriate. People who should know fast enough. So you can get ahead of that curve. An adversarial situation, it's all about timing. Can I know before or do I find out after? So again, I can criticize all these organizations, the efforts and policies, but they're evolving in the right direction.
Mitch, what's your take? Are things getting better? Because a lot of times we talk to the defenders and they are always kind of doing the best that they can. But I feel like sometimes they don't feel like they're getting any help and that the bad guys have free reign.
This is one of those, nobody calls up security and says, thanks, we haven't had any security incidents lately. Appreciate the great job you're doing. No, they hear about it when something happens, right? And so it's a bit of a, it feels like a whack-a-mole type process externally when really behind the scenes what security teams, organizations, and then now we're talking about agencies and both law enforcement and governmental, are trying to figure out ways that they can more effectively work together because you have to be able to take down not just criminal operations, which are much more sophisticated all the time, but also, geopolitical state actors, right? I think that's forcing a lot of it, where we're also seeing, not just a rise in criminal activity, but also how do we defend against nation state attacks and efforts that are undermining. And it isn't, always just taking down the power grid. It's undermining confidence in financial markets or health insurance, whatever it might be. There are now regulations showing up. New ones, for example, there's one called DORA, not to be confused with DevOps Research and Assessment, which is the Google sponsored report that we all know about it in the DevOps world. There is a EU regulation. It's the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which is talking specifically to financial institutions and about the resilience, the risk management, the third-party risk management, their operational resilience around security. And so every one of these things that are happening kind of lifts, all boats to make this more visible and more important. And I don't know if I would say forcing organizations to work together, but some of this can't be accomplished without governmental, private, public sector working together.
Chris, here in New York, the police department will come around and evaluate banks and kind of gently suggest to them that they're designed in a way that makes them easier to rob. And so they will sit down with the people who run that bank and say, you need to move the teller windows to the back and, make it harder for people just to run in there and kind of steal money and then run out the door. Does the government need to do that with IT? Because when I look at a lot of these attacks, they're not overly complicated. Somebody fished somebody's credentials and then logged in and sat in there for months and probably laughed all the time they were doing it, and then escalated their privileges and nobody knew about it for months on end. And it feels like it's just too easy.
Well, I think the answer is yes ish, right? So I like our process. So in a state, authoritarian system, you can say, to your point, government says you now need to do this, which means absolutely nobody's going to do that at all ever until they're forced to. They're not going to do anything else. I think our approach is, again, pretty healthy, right? No matter what you think, all my interactions with the U.S. federal government is a bunch of folks, getting paid less than me, trying really hard not to have to say you have to do this, because if the public sector can, beg, plead, chivvy, to your point, think about your question, there are roles. CISA has a lot of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, part of DHS, has a lot of efforts to promote adoption of things, two-factor authentication or whatnot. And while I don't have a great, deal of hope in security training writ large, I think, that helps move things forward. It helps us avoid having to, or helps us define what areas we really have to have regulations in and force private sector to do things that otherwise wouldn't be economical or achievable unless everybody was doing it.
Mitch, for a long time, we said, let's not shame the victim. They shouldn't be blamed for this, that, and the other. And yet, I may not blame somebody for taking their Ferrari and driving it into some downtown area and leaving the windows open and the keys in the ignition, but I might not have a lot of sympathy for them either. So, how do we kind of strike a balance here between not necessarily blaming the victim, but just, calling people out and saying, hey, this thing that you set up was just kind of, I wouldn't want to call it reckless, but certainly poorly designed.
Well, we have a situation like that is not directly cybersecurity, but with CrowdStrike and Delta, right? There's some shared blame to go around. Is it all CrowdStrike's fault that Delta didn't have whatever facilities, people, processes to be able to go out and do the remote maintenance on these systems in an emergency situation? I guarantee you they're not the only ones, right? So there is a customer side of this or a user side of this as well. I don't think we do much good by shaming the end users. And I'm only a believer in a limited amount of training is actually going to help there. Yes, we need to give folks a few simple things, basic things that they can do on an ongoing basis, not overburden them with lots of security, shame, and fear. That said, there are now CISOs who are, getting the backlash, right, of something happens at their organization and they're maybe criminally liable. There's a lot of things that are getting escalated or starting to be with potential ramifications. And I don't see that stopping. I think that's going to increase. So is it broad scale everywhere? And we're, don't turn left, because if you do that, you might get, penalized, and do this and you might get shamed if you turn right. It's not that substantial, but I think we're seeing more consequences as examples being made out of individuals and organizations.
Mm-hmm. Chris, are people more willing to share when they've messed up and kind of help their fellows, or are they still hiding all that?
Oh, that's almost a philosophical question. I don't know. I'm sort of I want to ask everybody else now. I know I'm a little optimistic. I think people like to and want to. However, right, if the consequence of doing so is negative enough, then people will just shy away from it, consciously or subconsciously. I think generally speaking, over the 30 years that I've been watching, it is more okay. I think it's socioculturally more okay, generationally more okay. And if we're not, again, with threat intelligence and now supply chain, I see a lot of organizations going, oh my God, my intellectual property, I can't share anything. I can't share anything. And you sit down with them and realize that, you know, you're sharing it already and you're not really sure where it's going, and putting a security around it, so you know where it is, allows you to say, okay, yes, we can share this. And then you lower your costs, increase your efficiency, outcompete your competitors, buy them out, and it becomes a standard. So we get there incrementally, but I don't know.
Well, see, here's what I'm trying to poke at in my roundabout way. Almost every day, you will see a report highlighting that so and so got breached and there was some tragic and a massive event that occurred. And I'm not sure that that's useful. And I think it gets reported because, it might move their stock price and the financial press cares. And there's just a massive amount of media around cybersecurity these days. But all that seems to do, Mitch, is drive people further underground, and they're less likely to come together and share the intelligence that we need to fight the fight. So is it counterproductive?
Well, drive underground or desensitizes to this. I've said this for a while. Another headline that says fill in the blank, breached blank, right? Unless data was stolen, whatever it is. You know what? There's so much of that we're desensitized to it, and the market is not reacting in a way to say, I'm not going to do business with them anymore. It has to be pretty extreme, and we don't see that happen very much when it relates to cybersecurity. So I think that's a lot of becoming essentially clickbait, right? Headlines of whatever, and people don't really pay attention to it that much. Does it affect me? Does it affect my business? I think what's more valuable is, let's talk about, the Chris Blask of the world and the progress he's making when he sees something that we're now cooperating between public and private better in this area, or an Alan Friedman talking about software supply chain and progress that we're making of trying to fill the gaps, if you will, that we have with that. I think that's what people need to, in our industry, not talking about the consumers, but in the tech industry and security industry, I think that's what we need to focus on. Because if that happens, I want to know, is that something I can take advantage of? Is it just good for me to be aware of it? My security team's taking care of it, whatever it might be. But I think headlines about more breaches are kind of not helpful. I mean, how often do we see Russia did this? China's doing that. People don't pay attention to it for the most
Yeah, I
part.
think the multitude of the media headlines around that does dull the impact of us being shocked by it. It has to be something major that impacts the public, I think, in a larger way, where people might stop and click and look. But you don't want the opposite to happen, where there's not enough eyeballs on it either. So there should be a balance there.
All right. Chris, last thoughts here. Is there too much cybersecurity rubbernecking and too many dog whistles, or what?
Yes. Right. Just yes. Right. Yeah. But yeah. So I think is only your comment sort of points to that. As it becomes less effective clickbait, right? Maybe we can see, the news world, handle a little bit more intelligently, but that's a lagging indicator at best. But yeah, it doesn't do a great deal of good. You're not, shaming people into doing the right thing is never a great idea. Better to make it faster, cheaper, more profitable, more rewarding, and then things get done in mass.
All right, folks. I think maybe we'll start with us, but maybe Techstrong will focus a little bit more on the who's doing something awesome for cybersecurity that helps fight the fight versus, the latest and greatest crime report. Hey, folks, thanks for being on the show. We're going to be at KubeCon this week. We're going to have reports on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Mitch is going to have a few of them. Mitch, you want to preview a couple of these?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of announcements coming. We're seeing more things happening at the edge. a lot more processing and Kubernetes moving to the edge. Of course, adoption continues to grow. KubeCon has become a developer conference. And interesting, one of the things I would advise to the vendor community is I do hear people say, well, developers go to those conferences, not buyers. Well, if you understand DevRel, that's your audience. That's who is going to be buying your product and telling their leadership to buy products. So, but we're going to see announcements from Oracle, from Microsoft, a number of folks that are all announcing big things, and I'll be hitting some of the high points, not necessarily in the way of reporting the news, because we'll have lots of that coverage already by the great editorial team, Mike, that you have. I'll try to add some color to say what I think is most interesting and why, and see if we can bring some additional perspective to that. And I think we're going to do some gangs from there, right? From Techstrong gangs, is that correct?
We are absolutely doing at least 3 gangs in a row from the show floor.
Nice.
So it'll be fun. And it's interesting to me, at least, that, all these things come full circle in my mind, because Kubernetes gives you more control over the infrastructure so you can run things more efficiently, which is good for sustainability. However, Kubernetes is arguably one of the most complex things out there in a production environment, which is not necessarily good for security. But hey, I'm sure those topics are going to be discussed at length this coming week, and we'll be back with more on that. Hey, I want to thank everybody for sharing their insights, and thank you all for watching the latest episode of Techstrong Gang. And please stay tuned. We got an awesome lineup right behind this. Until then, we'll see you next time.